In this video, we're going to create a measure to calculate invoice sales on a rolling 12-month basis. What I mean by this is if you take any particular date, it'll calculate the total invoice sales for the previous year running up to and including the date you select. If we take a specific example, I've plotted the end result actually on this visual here. If we take the very first date we have here, which is the 1st of April 2018, gives me invoice sales of 2.913 million. And what that means is my total invoice sales for the period of the 2nd of April 2017 through to and including the 1st of April 2018 was 2.912 million. Calculating values based on a rolling 12-month basis can be a very good way of looking at the underlying trends within your accounting data. Before we go into explain how this is calculated, let's take a quick look at the model. I've got a table of transaction lines, which is approximately 58,000 rows of transactional data, including sales invoice transactions running back over the last 800 days, which is a little over 2 years. I have a dates table, which is related to my transaction lines table. If you just take a look at the model there, I have a one-to-many relationship between my dates table and my transaction lines table based on the date column. Also in my dates table, I have a number of values. I've got the financial year, and my particular financial year is running from March through to April. So FY 2019 would be the financial year ending the 31st of March 2019. I have the month, which would be April, May, June, July, August, September, and so on. I have the period, which would be 1, 2, 3, and so on through to 12. I have the relative financial year, so 0 would be this financial year, -1 would be last financial year, and so on. And I have the relative months. Again, 0 would be this month, -1 would be last month, +1 would be next month, and so on. Because of this relationship, if I filter my dates table, I'm also filtering my transaction lines table. And that's the feature that we're going to use in terms of building rolling 12-month sales. Because putting it simply, if for any selected date, we can filter this dates table by a 12-month period running up to and including the date we select, it is going to filter the transaction lines table. And then if I have a measure, which is invoice sales, calculating my sales amount for my transaction lines table, then that invoice sales measure will be filtered by the date period that I'm selecting. So that's the basis in which we're doing this. Go back to the report. Let's first look at our invoice sales measure. There's nothing startling here. I'm using the calculate SumX combination. I'm using SumX to sum all the individual line items of the net amount of my transaction lines table. And then I'm using the calculate function to apply this additional filter where the transaction is a receivable type transaction. In other words, a variant of a sales invoice. Now, because of the relationship that we have between the dates table and my transaction lines table, if I create a card just displaying this invoice sales value, I can slice the page by financial year, and that'll change my total invoice sales value. From 2018, 2.92 million, 2019 was 4.16 million. And equally, I could do the same kind of slicing by month as well. So the problem to calculate on any particular date, this rolling 12 months value, is really a filters problem, because I already have a measure calculating invoice sales. So if I say, okay, if I take that measure and if I filter my dates table just to include, in this case, just to include the 12 months running up to and including the 2nd of December 2018, that should give me my right answer of my rolling 12-month sales of 3.7 million. So how do we do that? Well, there are 3 things we need to do to prepare that filter. Firstly, if we want to calculate these values, particularly if we go right back to the beginning value there of the 1st of April 2018, we need to calculate the invoice sales amount based on dates before this. Now that gives us a problem because my page is filtered on the financial year 2019, which is the 1st of April 2018 through to the 31st of March 2019. So the page is filtered so there aren't any dates in this page prior to the 1st of April 2018. So the first thing I need to do in my calculation is to remove all filters applying to my dates table. Then what I need to do is reapply the filters. So I'm looking at the 12 months running up to the date that I've selected. That's best explained perhaps on this chart here. So today is the 10th of April 2019, and what I want to do is apply two filters to my dates table. Firstly, I've selected all of them, I've got rid of all filters, and now I want to apply two new filters. The first filter I want to apply will determine the upper bound of my date range. So I want to include today, which is the 10th of April 2019. So the upper bound will be defined by, I want all dates that are less than or equal to the 10th of April 2019. Likewise, my lower bound can be determined still if I reference the 10th of April 2019. If I add a year to the date and it is greater than the 10th of April 2019, then I want to include that also as my second filter. So in this case, all dates equal to or above 11th of April 2018, if I add a year to it, that will be greater than the 10th of April 2019. So that's the second filter I want to apply. If I have my entire dates table and I apply this filter and this filter at the same time, then what I'll end up with is a filtered dates table covering the range from the 11th of April 2018 to the 10th of April 2019 inclusive. And that's the principle behind the measure that we're going to write now. So we have an example, a pre-prepared example, which I can show you. And we will use the calculate function, and we'll use the calculate function to take the invoice sales measure that we've already created and then just apply a filter to it, or filters to it. The format is calculate invoice sales filter. And then let's just remind ourselves of what the filter function does. The syntax of the filter function is very simple. It takes a table and applies a filter to it and returns that filtered table. We want to take the dates table, apply a filter to it, and return that filtered table to our measure and then get the right result. Our table specification is this. It's our dates table, but we're prefixing it with this all function. It returns all the rows in a table, ignoring any filters that may have been applied. So in other words, it clears all the filters that are already sitting on the dates table, which is exactly what we want to do, because we want to ignore any slices that are on the page, because we need to go back in time to dates that are earlier than are covered by the slices. So our table within our filter function is all dates. Simple as that. And then the filters that we apply, we're going to apply two filters. Remember, less than or equal to the date we're selecting, or greater than or equal to the minimum bound. So I'm going to use the AND function to apply the two distinct filters. And the first filter is a simple one here, where I say date is less than or equal to max date, which sounds a little bit strange, but actually it works very easily and works very well. What the max function does, operating on the dates table in a particular context, if I'm looking at an entire table, it will return the maximum value of the dates table. But in this particular case, I'm looking at the row in the dates table that I've selected, and it's saying, what is the maximum value of that? Well, it is that date. So the first filter is any date that is less than or equal to the date that I'm looking at in the row in the dates table. If we're not sure about that, we can quickly test it. I just open up a new tab there, and if I just create a measure, let's call it max date. Okay, and let's just chart that, and I'll pop it into a table, and date value, don't want the hierarchy, show the individual date. I want to show alongside that the max date value, and they should be the same. And let's pop that out so you can see it better. And we can see each date, the date is equal to the max date, or the max date equals the date. That's the result we wanted. So I can get rid of that measure now, just delete that. If we look again at our formula for the rolling 12 months, we're selecting all the dates table, we're taking all the filters off the dates table, then we're applying the first filter, which is just this row here, up to the comma, which says anywhere where the date is less than or equal to the selected date. And then we're applying a second filter where we're using the date add function. If we just remind ourselves of what that does, date add function takes a date, it adds a number of intervals based on a certain interval. So if I take a certain date, I add one interval of a year. That's how I can get my time shift of 1 year into my calculation. And let's have a look at how I do that. So if I take a particular date, and if I add a year to it, so if I add 1 year to it, and if the result is greater than max date state, we saw that, it's greater than my selected date, then I want to include that in the filter. In other words, this second part is applying this filter here. So I'm taking this date, I'm adding a year, and if it's greater than the date that I'm looking at, then I want to include it. So we go back to the measure again. We're using the calculate function. We're taking the invoice sales measure that we've already created. We're taking the dates table. We're removing all filters from the dates table, and then we're applying 2 new filters. One filter, I'm saying any date that is less than or equal to the current date selected. And I'm applying another filter where any date, if you add a year to it, it is greater than my current date selected. And if both those conditions are true, hence the AND function here, then I want to include that as the filter. And the result is my rolling 12 months sales visualization. As simple as that. So if I wanted to change that and do a rolling invoice sales based on months, I could change that to months. If I wanted it rolling on based on number of days or number of quarters, it's as simple as changing the parameter there. If I want to do rolling 2 years or rolling 2 months or rolling 3 months, I just change the value from 1 to 2 or 3. And if I want to change what it is that I'm aggregating at this particular point, I'm aggregating the invoice sales amount, I can just write a new measure and substitute that in. So in summary, that's a nice, quick and easy way to prepare a rolling 12-month invoice sales measure that you could also adapt to rolling any period for any particular measure that you want.